Hello, give me a minute. Whoop. We got about 5 minutes. Okay.
Because the guys are coming, they're scared.
Wait a minute. Is that what I'm doing wrong here? Everybody come on in. I'll be getting with you in just a second, trying to get some stuff lined up for you. That's what I've been doing wrong. Shoot. I'll be dog. There we go. Okay, y'all be sure, I forgot in my 11 o'clock hour to tell y'all to be sure to sign in and sign out for your attendance to be counted. I realize I went on break without catching up on getting all your points posted. I apologize for that. I know y'all need to know where you are because a lot of y'all are not social work majors. So be sure you sign in because I'll be using those sign-ins for your attendance points. Remember, we had 10 of those. Okay. Right. I think we're about there. We got one more minute. Topical assignment. Okay. Whew. Hold on a second. Just a second more. Okay, we're a minute in. Be sure you sign in as well as sign out. I'm going to put this last label on here and then we'll get busy. Okay, we are here. Just everybody. Just get signed in. We're 2 minutes in, so. Ugh, dang, hold on. I want to make sure I have this label up for y'all. I was trying to get it done this morning and. All right. Okay. All right. So how was y'all's holiday?
Kind of short, honestly.
Kind of short, Timothy?
It was all right.
It was all right. Y'all taking part in a lot of the spring stuff going on, whatever. Yes, no conversation today. Just ready to get going. Slow start getting back in the swing of things, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, make sure you sign in or out. I have from the videos that we've done and I posted that are recordings, I have the text printout of your sign in and sign out that goes with that's available on Zoom. So I'll be adding those in. You'll see that being count up. Okay. So be sure you sign in and out. And Lexi, I see you're on here too. If you don't mind staying on after we get done so we can talk about your advising, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, so let's first look at where we are. This advising note, of course, is just for social work majors. If you are a social work major, you need to be advised in order to keep you on track. We don't want you to get behind, because if you get behind or you take your courses out of sequence, then you could end up being delayed in graduation. We don't want that. We're a small program. We have 2 full-time social work faculty right now, and we'll have back to 3 again in the fall, but that still doesn't give us enough to offer our courses every semester, and especially not field placement. So anyway, if you're a social work major, make sure you get advised, okay? You don't want an advising flag keeping you from getting registered, because we have already begun summer advising. You can still advise for summer and still register for summer, I believe. And then you can also register for fall. All right, so Unit 4 goes to the end of the semester. We're in a downhill swing right now. I hope all your other courses are going good, and I will endeavor to get this caught up for y'all by the end of this week, so you know where you stand. This course was one that I unfortunately was not able to get to in time for midterm grading. And I do regret that. And remember what I've told you, and I will tell you again and again as often as you need to hear it so that it sinks in. It's also in the course syllabus that I will not give you material that you can't get done in at least a week's time. I will not grade you on stuff that's in the syllabus that you don't have posted. I cannot ethically, as a social worker and as your instructor for this course, I cannot grade you on stuff that you don't have posted, right? So you can only be graded on what is actually on your grade book. If it's not there yet, that's because it's not been recorded yet if we've done it. If it's not there at all because we just never got to it as shown on the syllabus, then you can only be graded on what you actually have opportunity to do. Okay. And you will have more extra credit opportunities too. So be on the lookout for that. So I'm trying to get that all wrapped up for you. Okay. So, oh wait, this needs to go down here. Sorry about that. Okay. And we're going to take that out. That's just for podcasts made for women. I don't know why I put it up there before in other classes. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is more details about the various criteria. Remember the 5 things that we look for when we are assessing the validity of a child abuse report or a child neglect report, okay? And that is, y'all should know them by now. And I don't always say these in order, but they're all the same things, that it is the child's physical condition, first and foremost. Even though I'm not saying them in order, the child does come first, the child's physical condition, the child's behavior, the parent's behavior, the parent-child interaction, and the environment, the home that they live in, right? So all of those things are taken together in a complete assessment of a child abuse report, okay, or a child abuse and neglect report. Remember that we still use child abuse and neglect, CA/N as an abbreviation, but really it's child maltreatment. Someday we'll get to that point, I suppose, where we'll just do child MALT(x), right? Child maltreatment, because child maltreatment really is what it is. It's treating children in malevolent ways or bad ways, whether deliberate or not, whether by being informed as a parent or not. If you don't have good parenting role modeling, then your chances of being a good parent without some deliberate effort on your part to read and learn about parenting, take parenting classes, whatever it takes to be a better parent than your own parent was to you, that's what it takes. If you've had bad parenting, then you don't have a good, like I said, a good role model for that. So we're going to look at some of these categories that we didn't spend a whole lot of time on. Emotional neglect. I want to point out this video that is required under this heading, required reading and viewing. This one on emotional neglect is really very good and short. This one is a TED Talk. It's a little bit longer, but what she talks about in terms of gaslighting, which means it comes from a film that was named Gaslighting. And so it stayed a term since, I guess that film was made around in the 1930s, maybe. I don't know. You can look that up and verify for me, but that term now has come to mean what that film showed, which was, it was a fictional film in black and white back in the 30s. But it showed a woman who was being driven insane by her husband by turning down the gas lights. It was a film made in the 1930s, but it was set at the turn of the century when they still used gas lights, where it was filled with kerosene or, kerosene gas, and you would turn it up, to get the full light. Well, you turn it down to, reduce the lighting. And then we still use these, by the way. We don't call them gas lights, but we call them kerosene lights, and we turn them down. We we still use these in camping, for example. You know, like the Coleman lamps that you use when you're out in the woods or in the wilderness, whatever. So, but those were staple things that they had for lighting back in the day after they were invented. Prior to that, using candles, of course. So this film showed the gaslighting, and that became a term for being tricked or made to believe something is happening to you that really isn't, or to be driven a little crazy or insane because of being misled all the time and deliberately. And so this lady tells her story about being gaslighted and how to deal with it. And she also addresses some of these issues. You don't have this, oh, I didn't get that fixed, sorry. But you don't have these page numbers to reference yet, okay? I'm going to give them to you, and you will have those chapters as I provided the, what was it? I think it was 3 and 4 that I gave you, right? Okay. Let's take that out, so I don't want you to be confused about that, okay? All right, so we're just going to touch on these right now. I want you to read these and also look at these 2 videos. This one on emotional neglect and this one on gaslighting, which is really actually deliberate emotional abuse. Remember, abuse is something that's done deliberately to a child to harm that child. And you can do it in ways that are not physically shown, but are shown instead by cognitive development, by personality disturbances, by emotional disturbances that are induced because of either emotional neglect or emotional abuse. We can collectively put those together and talk about emotional maltreatment, right? So what's listed here under this video then are the primary forms of emotional psychological maltreatment, okay? Besides witnessing, as it says here, emotional abuse, experiencing or witnessing domestic violence is included in this category. These are the forms of maltreatment where you reject a child outright. You refuse to acknowledge the child's worth and legitimacy of their needs. In other words, you don't respond to their needs at all, and you do it on purpose. That's different than neglect. Sometimes you have mothers who have postpartum depression, not postpartum psychosis, but depression, where they experience a failure of the parent to respond to their cues, to be held, to be made comfortable by changing the diaper or by feeding them. By interacting with them, there may be slow verbal development, slow physical development on all kinds of milestones that are used, usually in what's called the Denver Developmental Scale by pediatricians in the child's first year of life and thereafter for up to about toddler age. And then they will measure if they are on track or even if they're above level, you know, what a normal child would be. So you can see these manifestations of impaired child development on various measures like social development, verbal development, motor skills, whether they're gross motor skills or fine motor skills. So, and those are done typically by allied health providers and by psychologists. So here are the forms of child psychological maltreatment or emotional abuse. Rejecting a child that I just talked about, isolating a child, putting them as in the Gabriel Hernandez, wasn't it Gabriel Hernandez? Why can't I ever remember the name of that film? Was it Gabriel Hernandez? Netflix film, Horribly Abused Child?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Gabriel Hernandez. Yeah, I got it right. I can't believe it, but I got it right. Okay. So they isolated that child. They actually abused that child in every form, whether it was emotional abuse and neglect or physical abuse or just neglect of basic needs, right? I don't know that they sexually abused that child, though. I don't remember that in that show. But anyway, they killed the child, the worst outcome, right? So they isolated him, they rejected him, they targeted him. He became the literal whipping post for all of their sick, perverse pleasures of inflicting torture on that child, as well as just a source of all of their frustrations, etc. A target child, by the way, is not an uncommon manifestation in a family where there is more than one child. That you may see a child who's perfectly cared for when they're in public or in school, but there may be one child who is not. I'll tell you a story about one of those in a minute. So isolating a child, literally keeping them away from others, or limiting their interactions in a severe way. And as it describes here, not letting them have normal social experiences, not letting them have friends, not letting them socialize with other kids. Being overprotective may be a form of child neglect in this category of isolation, but when it's deliberate to this extent that you literally shelter them away, then that's abuse, emotional abuse. Terrorizing a kid. My favorite story to demonstrate terrorizing, where adult verbally abuses a child or creates extraordinary fear, is the case of, actually, it was emotional neglect that the parent did not realize. This was in a parenting class. This parent said this, but he was talking about how, he knew how to keep his child he knew how to control his child. This is a young couple. They had this one child. He was 3 years old, had been referred because the grandmother, the paternal grandmother, was concerned about her son and called it a report. And the parents said, okay, we'll allow you to talk to us, and we'll go ahead and go voluntarily to a parenting class. They had the choice not to go because there was no physical harm to the child. It's hard to prove emotional neglect, much less emotional maltreatment. More on that in a minute. But anyhow, so this parent came to this parenting group that Dr. Salisbury and I were doing at the time, and he talked about how he could control his 3-year-old and had always been able to control him. And he was really able to control him now because it was really showing how he had, been able to teach this child early on from the time he started walking on. And it was that he kept a baseball bat in the corner of the back door of their house. And he had taken the child over there and shown him that bat when he was barely able to talk and was toddling around and saying, "This bat, I'm gonna hit you with this bat. You see that?" And he picked it up and he showed it. He said, "Yeah, I picked it up," and just went, "I'm gonna beat your head in if you don't do what I tell you to do. Just remember that." And Pamela and I just, Dr. Salisbury and I just sat there, it was one of those mouth open incidences, like, whoa, and so here's this 3-year-old child that is just barely communicative because we had childcare provided, and it was what we called a family encounter event, using a nurturing program model. And so we would have the parents interact with their child during a break time and a game time, so we could sort of observe. This child was 3 years old and was the most withdrawn kid you have ever seen. And part of it was because this father had disciplined him by still threatening him with beating his head in with that bat. The child believed it. Here's the thing about children at that developmental age, that they cannot separate fiction from nonfiction. They can't tell that a parent doesn't really mean they're going to beat your head in, that they're just trying to scare you, right? This dad, picked up his kid, loved on him and stuff, but the kid was petrified of this father because he could not tell the difference and was confused between whether, when he got home, the father was going to say something to him about beating him up. Now, we can assume that because we know developmentally that that is true about children, that they can't separate that. So they're always keeping that in their mind. The one thing that we remember probably most, if we remember anything at all from, say, age 2 to 3, even upwards to 4 years old, but especially between 2 and 3, is typically, psychologists tell us, what has been the most strong emotional impact. So I always think about this with myself because, I don't remember anything about my biological father, who my mother left when I was the age of 3. She remarried my father, who is my father, as far as I know, when I was 4.5, almost 5 years old. But I do remember my mother screaming and being thrown downstairs, jerked off a bed, which she was trying to hold on to covers. I remember that. And that's because of those strong, scary emotions that went with that age. Psychologists tell us they become indelible memories because of the strength of that emotion. We don't understand it, and our memory may be grossly distorted as far as the details because we don't have the cognitive ability to place that exactly. But those emotions of fear and the fragments of what was happening at that moment is very common, just like my own experience. That's what this child was experiencing. He was in the midst of forming those fragments of fear about his father. You see? So that's what terrorizing is, as emotional neglect in the case of that experience that Dr. Salisbury and I had in working as consultants with DCFS. But there are parents who deliberately do that, who will deliberately, call their child names, slap them around, tell them that they're no good, talk them down, force them to get in the parent's face so that they can in turn react and become physically abusive, perhaps. So that's terrorizing. Ignoring a child is completely an emotional abuse. Ignoring is when a parent deliberately shuns a child. Shunning a child, the younger the child is, the more damaging it is, because the child needs that interaction with their parent. So by the time they're 6 months on, they are expecting that interaction with the healthy attachment. But when all of a sudden it's cut off because a parent believes that that's an effective way to parent, or that they are deliberately being mean as a child ages and just will not communicate with them at all and leaves the child to their own devices. Now we're going from a child at 6 months who doesn't understand that his parents not picking him up, not talking to him because they're mad at him, inappropriate as that would be for a parent to be at a 6-month-old. Frustrated, yes. Angry at a child because they did something they don't understand what they're doing. Not common sense, and certainly not ability to manage one's own adult behavior. We might say, okay, that's not true for everybody. So ignoring a child, refusing to be engaged with that child when they are older, allowing the child to just meet their own needs, however they can get them met, not providing for them anything that they need, not communicating with them at all, is a form of shunning or ignoring the children. And so as a result, they go out, seek their own needs, get them met in however way they can, right? Corrupting a child, my very favorite way of describing this is the way Crosson Tower, which is the author of the text that I gave you the chapters of, she calls it encouraging maladaptive behavior. And I've always liked that. That was introduced in about 2002, I think, Crosson Tower, one of her texts. And so maladaptive behavior means antisocial behavior, in the sense that you are not behaving in ways that are socially approved, right? We all learn at the hands of our parents first and foremost, and then in school, and then as we become an adolescent, by the consequences of interacting with our environment on our own, skipping school, and the school calls your parents, or leaving the scene of an accident because you're scared and your parents are going to get mad at you because you wrecked the car. Maybe they're great parents, but you're trying to deal with the emotional stuff of it, of having a car wreck or whatever, and you just leave. And then what's going to happen? You're going to suffer the consequences of the police coming and saying, you left the scene of a crime. Now your parents have got to deal with you in juvenile detention, maybe, or probation if it's your first time ever doing something like that. Who knows? Depending on whatever. So, just trying to think of things off the top of my head. But anyway, corrupting a child would be engaging them in substance abuse at an early age, certainly before the age of 21, we could say, by most states' criteria today. But when we're talking about allowing a child to say, oh gosh, I think about my young parents, because my mom had me when she was pregnant when we were 15. She had me before she turned 16 in August. I was born in May that year. And my dad and she were still pretty young, even though I was, 5 years old when they got married. They were still in their early 20s, And so, and she younger than my dad. So that raised me, not biological. But anyhow, they thought it was pretty funny when I was only in the 4th grade that I was going up and they would be playing pinochle. My dad was in the Navy and were living in Illinois, just real cramped quarters because he was enlisted, not an officer who got better quarters than enlisted people did, as I learned as I grew to adulthood. Anyway, so they would play pinochle with a couple that they met at this housing place where we lived that was, kind of cramped and old. And I would go up and sneak their beer and drink their beer. And I remember them laughing at me because I got tipsy. That's encouraging maladaptive behavior, but it would be considered emotional neglect because of lack of appreciation at that time, which would have been the early 60s, of how that form creates a risk to brain development for a child that's in 4th grade. Because how old are you? 10, maybe? Yeah, that'd be about right. So anyway, that's encouraging maladaptive behavior. I think about my brother, bless his heart. He's in his 50s, and his son, who's now in his early 20s, he had a late child. Not a late child. Let me say that right. He and his wife only had one child, and it was their son. But oh my God, he is a doper from way back, from his own adolescence. Was oh gosh, my poor brother. He grew marijuana in my mother and dad's outdoor pantry. Oh, when my mother was ill. So long story, the short of it is that he encouraged maladaptive behavior because he started smoking with his own and only son when he was 10 years old. And now we know, of course, that the brain development for children who start smoking pot early on, marijuana, is detrimental to brain development. Fortunately, it was not a frequent occurrence until he was in high school, still problematic, but he, was able to finish high school and actually has gone to community college and is doing fairly well. But in any case, that's encouraging maladaptive behavior. And not only that, it's actually unintentional abuse because it taught his son to also be a doper and also created potential brain injury with his development. It's very sad. I hate telling that story, but anyway. So those are all the forms of emotional maltreatment, okay? Remember, emotional maltreatment includes emotional neglect as well as emotional abuse. When we talk about emotional neglect, we also have to talk about parents. And particularly, some researchers have isolated mothers because we have so many mothers. In fact, I just saw something on my US Census Bureau link that I'm subscribed to after helping with the census a little bit this year for the first time, that there are now more women, single women raising children than ever in history, which is very sad, because that means that women are having to maintain the home, whatever home they're in, apartment, a shelter, their car, if they're near homeless, or in a home, a house that they own, maybe, who knows. So partly because of divorce, but also the usual things, widowhood, abandonment, choosing to be a single parent. All of those are modern things that have influenced why we have an increase potentially. I'm supposing because of what I've read over my lifetime in this area. So we have more single women today raising children than ever. And that's kind of sad. So this information is probably more relevant now than when it was first studied and published in the early 1990s. And that is the types of neglectful mothers. Mothers may be neglectful because of immaturity, that they simply are not old enough to be a parent. I think that may have been the case with my mother, that kind of stayed with her until she was in her mid-20s and had my brother and sister, who were 7 and 9 years younger than me, respectively. She had kind of a more friend relationship with me rather than a parent-child relationship that would be more appropriate. So there's that form of immaturity that can stay with the parent if they don't ever have opportunities to learn better parenting, which fortunately she did. I don't know, maybe we could say that she did, but then maybe again, maybe not, considering the outcome for my brother. My sister turned out great. She's the RN. But my brother, I don't know. I think he was the youngest child, and a lot of factors involved there. So an immature mother, it can be by virtue of age, that they just don't know enough. 14, 15, 16-year-old mother. Or it can be by lack of emotional maturity, even if they are an older adult. It can be by personality disorder. A parent who is narcissistic, for example, may be more interested in satisfying their own needs. And that need to satisfy their own needs may cause them to just completely ignore or leave their children to their own devices at inappropriate ages, leaving a child to sleep by themselves while the mother goes out and parties because they figure the child's going to be okay. What if there's a house fire? What if the child wakes up? What if the child's walking age and maybe they're 3 years old and they're left alone? That happens with parents who are personality disordered, especially if they are narcissistic parents. They are more interested in their own needs satisfied than that of their children. That's another type of parent. It can be mother or father, either any of these really, but we see this most and first studied among mothers, that again may be more relevant today given this new data that I just saw this morning actually. So there's the emotionally immature, the personality disturbed mother who will emotionally neglect, or not just emotionally neglect, but neglect generally basic needs for children. Another form of a neglectful mother is the cognitively impaired mother. And in this case, it may be a mother who has limitations due to Down syndrome or other disabilities, cognitive disabilities or learning disabilities, and they just don't know how to take care of the children. In cases of children who are raised by parents with Down syndrome or who have serious cognitive impairment, and there are such parents, we tend to see that they do very well in nurturing their kids. They love very well, but they just don't know how to meet basic needs, not just for their children, but also for themselves. And a quick story about this one is regarding a couple who were Down syndrome. I was working hospital. My first social work job was in a hospital, St. Francis Hospital, as a matter of fact, and I was called to help with making sure that there were adequate arrangements for these parents. They both had Down syndrome. He more functional than she was. They had a set of twins. Can you imagine? It turned out that in the home assessment that I got the privilege of going out on with the worker at the time, and putting in place in-home nursing care for the first 6 weeks of the children being there, that these parents lived with his parents. So they were actually being supervised regularly by his parents. So these parents had the benefit of raising their children, their newborns, with the supervision of their own parents who were not cognitively impaired. Okay, so it is entirely possible to raise children who are normal. I have a relative who sadly was born to gosh, this tells you a whole lot about my or family of origin stuff. But I have an aunt who was about 5 years younger than my mother and was the baby of the family. She was spoiled, had an alcoholic father, obviously my own grandfather, who died when I was 3 years old, and of alcoholism. Well, she became alcoholic, and she had one child, and this child was born fetal alcohol syndrome. My aunt was actually drunk when she went in to deliver her only child. Well, this child, of course, with fetal alcohol syndrome has all of the markings, which is the lowered ears, a unique facial appearance that is still referred to today, to my knowledge, in NICU as a funny looking kid, FLK syndrome. So they just have odd looking features. Their eyes may be wide set, wide space between their eyes, and their ears low set. They also have cognitive impairment or learning disabilities. And this first cousin of mine does. She went on, she's now in her 40s. Her mother died when she was in her 50s. And she has 2 children, one of whom was born impaired, but not because of alcoholism, because of, I think, autism. And that child was adopted by her husband's sister, who was a special ed teacher. Isn't that cool? Turned out that when she met her husband, who is also cognitively impaired, but not as severely as she is, that his mother was also a special ed teacher. And then his mother and his sister, both special ed teachers. Isn't that amazing? So their second child, a little girl, the sister adopted. She and her husband adopted because they didn't have children. She went on to have another child, but she raised up this child who's now in high school and doing great, has no cognitive impairments at all. And I'm not sure what the source of my cousin's husband was for his cognitive limitations, but I know it wasn't alcoholism. Nonetheless, she raised her children fine. And by the grace of God, there was no cognitive impairment for her firstborn child, which is a little boy who is actually musically talented and is also in high school. So there are good outcomes for children who are born to and raised by children or parents with disabilities, especially if they are cognitive limitations or cognitive impairments or developmental delays. And that's the story. So this couple that were both Down syndrome, went on to raise, I would assume, healthy children because they had the involvement of their parents and siblings, I'm sure, after their parents were gone. And those kids would be adults now themselves. So there's, again, to repeat, forms of emotional, not just emotional, but all forms of neglect, types of mothers who are prone to neglect their children would be those who are immature, who are personality disordered or narcissistic, who have cognitive impairments or limitations, and parents who have severe psychological illness, psychiatric illness. For example, schizophrenia. And there's an interesting bit of research done about this particular type of mother who can be neglectful or abusive. And the research showed that it tended to be based on whether or not the child became part of the delusional process when the schizophrenic parent or psychotic parent was in a psychotic episode. Okay. So, and you don't have to be schizophrenic, you don't have to be just schizophrenic to have psychotic episodes. There are psychotic episodes with major depression. There are psychotic episodes with other DSM illnesses, and obviously, of course, with schizophrenia. So this research said that parents will be more toward neglecting their children, just not meeting their needs when they go into a psychosis, and the child is not part of the psychosis. If, however, the child enters into that psychotic episode, becomes part of whatever that delusion is with that parent, then that child is at great risk of physical abuse and maybe even death. Perfect example is puerperal or postpartum psychosis. So that's another diagnosis. And so we saw that with Andrea Yates, the mother who killed her 5 children by drowning them all because she had this escalated incidence of postpartum psychosis with each birth of her child that was subsequent, one right after another, 5 children, to where she had a complete psychotic break. And that's what happens, is that the children become part of that psychotic episode when they are abused or harmed or killed as a result. It's emotional neglect when they are not part of the psychotic episode. So now you've got the parent who's immature, who will neglect, usually not intending, the parent who is narcissistic, personality disordered, the parent who is psychotic, what did I say, the parent who's immature, I think I said that one first, and then there is the parent who's cognitively impaired, and then the final is the poor mother. The mother who is poor, financially poor, barely making ends meet, and maybe is living in a situation where she lives only on welfare and may have some of these other circumstances of a neglectful mother, will lean more towards neglecting her children, meeting her own needs first if she's narcissistic, for example, or if she is immature, or if she is living with a child with cognitive impairment herself and is not able to meet her child's needs financially or physically because of her cognitive impairments. But then poverty also causes parents to be neglectful because they may work double jobs in order to make ends meet. In fact, they may work 3 jobs trying to piecemeal together. Even mothers who have good jobs. Excellent book that I read some time ago. I wish I could remember the title of it now. I don't, but it was about a case of a mother whose son got involved with a girl who had been sexually abused. And the girl tricked the boy into, they were both in high school. I think they were like 16, maybe. And she befriended him, made him think that, she was in love with him or whatever. And she was being sexually abused. She really was. The book was really about her, but it also involved this boy, classmate of hers, who she told about her abuse and how horrible it was, and that she wished her father was dead, and finally talked him into actually killing her father. In the story, he stalked him, watched his patterns, shot him in the driveway, leaving for work that morning, as the girl watched him kill her father because they planned it and plotted it together. Well, it turns out that that boy was the child of a mother who was an RN, but because she was raising 3 children on her own and had abandoned basically, and then ultimately divorced the father, she also worked another job as well as overtime on her RN job. So she barely, was able to provide for all of her kids' needs. And she certainly was not there for that child. The 16-year-old young adult, adolescent child, when she really needed to be in order to, I'm sorry. Let me stop for a minute. I'm so sorry. I can't get back to mute. Okay, they're quiet for the moment. We're not too much longer. Okay, so did I click share my screen or not?
No, man.
Oh, shucks. All this time I thought I was sharing my screen. I'm so sorry. Oh, Lordy. No. Okay. Oh my goodness. Hold on. Dang it. I am so sorry. I can't figure out how to get back to the full screen where I can see the bottom menu here. There it is. Okay. I am so sorry. I thought I was sharing the screen the whole time. Okay. I'll go back over this in a minute. Let me finish this neglect discussion though. I'm drawing it out like I always do. Sorry. Anyhow, where was I? Got distracted by the dogs and realizing I wasn't sharing. Emotional neglect and child maltreatment overall. Trying to think back where I was. Wasn't I telling you a story?
Yes,
Come on,
ma'am.
Heather.
You were talking about the boy and the RN for a mom.
Yes, that's right. The book I read. Like I said, I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's been so long ago. The boy was being raised by a mother who was never at home. That's the bottom line. And so as a result, he was engaging in this, not talking to his mother. He was, just not really getting the supervision that he really needed. And so he was very vulnerable because of the absence of his father, one could say, but mostly because he just didn't have a parent there available to him and accessible to him readily at all. So he became an easy target for this girl who was suffering from abuse. They both went to jail, by the way, at the end of the story, as I recall. Anyway, okay, so let's back up for just a minute and be sure we review where we are, okay? Since you weren't seeing this, I'm so sorry. this I was pointing to and telling y'all about this, and now you can see it. Now it'll probably make more sense. If you are this applies to only social work majors, as it says right here. If you are a social work major, if you're not, just ignore it. Here, though, class participation and attendance, we have our Zoom link here. I'll be putting the recordings up. We didn't have a link on the first day of first class meeting that we had when this unit began, because we were on spring break, started on the 5th. Okay. And then you've got this video on emotional neglect. Let me double check and see which one this one is. A minute. Ah, good. Let's look at this for a second. No, we're not. We're not going to look at that. That's not the one I thought it was. Okay. All right. But here's a video for you. You've got some handouts and chapters that I'm going to be posting up there for you. I'll probably, after class, go ahead and open up some of this and remove this reference to a chapter until I can actually get it posted. And then I'll make an announcement as I've been doing. Okay. This one is about gaslighting. Here is the information I was going through that you couldn't see, but now you can. These are listed for you in the description of this video. Okay. Right there. So here it is. And then I want to never mind. Never mind. I'm sorry. I was checking something to be sure. I see if I could get this uncluttered a little bit for you, but I can't because of the way I set it up originally. Anyhow, there's another reference to the text. This gaslighting video is just really excellent in that it covers a lot of these forms of maltreatment, emotional maltreatment that we call abuse, emotional abuse. And remember, there's two categories: emotional neglect that generally is unintentional, but it can be intentional. And then there's emotional abuse that is almost always intentional. I'm going to tell you a quick story about that before I leave that information entirely. Okay. You have a video and web page about foster care that you're required to look at. And you also have an assignment right here that everything will be due that last class meeting, which will be, let me see, wait a minute. I think I put May 2nd, and that is not correct. Mundo. I think our last class meeting is, oh, shoot. Oh my. I think our last class meeting may be April 29th. Isn't the last day of classes May 3rd? Is that what y'all are thinking?
I think we go until the 4th, and then we do the second half of our spring break, aka Warhawk days off, from the 5th to the 7th.
Yeah.
So I think that our last class is the 4th.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, because I put May 2nd, Sunday, May 2nd, but that's actually the last day that you should submit stuff. But you know what? I'm going to change that to the 9th. So you have that, because that's what I meant to do. And I think I was in a hurry trying to get this together for y'all. So I'll fix that and change that to the last day you have material. So we'll have a last class lecture on the 4th. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to fix that. You see, I put May 2nd. That's where I was putting it because I was thinking that was our last week of classes. But really, okay, it'll become clearer when I put it up there for you. Okay. All right. So you're going to look at a resource here that I'm going to give you. And wait, that's your reflective writing. Your reflective writing, just to rehash, is about anything to do with your reaction to the course material. If you want to summarize, because you're saying, I don't know how to react to this, whatever, I'll just summarize a couple of points that stuck with me. Okay, it's up to you. It's just a vehicle to allow students to, post stuff, to discharge any negative feelings that you might have had, or concerning feelings or strong emotional reactions you may have had, whether or not you had any personal experience. It might have been just a friend of yours and you had an opinion, you just want to put it out there, that's what that's for. So I don't give you a topic for that. You write whatever you want to. It's easy points, okay? So too will be this last class assignment. So that'll be up there for you. So both of those are available. Okay. And then this is supplemental resources that I've found for you, things that may be useful or interesting to you. One on attachment issues. This one about Beth Thomas is, it's a real case that actually occurred in this video, Child of Rage, old film, but still just quite excellent. She and her siblings were taken into custody and had been horribly abused in every way possible. We haven't talked about, which we will on Thursday, about sexual abuse specifically. Some more additional information from the Children's Bureau on child neglect that you will want to look at. Substance abusing parents, some information reading there. If you like to, remember, supplemental is voluntary. It means that I typically do not put information that you must know on a quiz or a requirement. This is to just give you more information to expand what you have potential to be exposed to. Child Advocacy Center is a source for where you can get more information about forensic interviewing. Forensic interviewing is not something, forensics is not just a criminal investigation or CIS TV show type just done by police people or coroners, the guys that go out and get all the evidence and put that together with their autopsy findings. It's not just that. Forensics means to look at all of the findings associated with a particular situation. Okay. So when you do a forensic interview related to child maltreatment, it's something that has a negative consequence for the child. And what you're looking for are all of the pieces that go with that. So forensic interviewing, as the Child Advocacy Center trains on. I actually went to the 1-week training when I was in Jacksonville and doing consultant work with their DCFS there for a while when I was in private practice. But what you learn is all of the things that we're covering in this class, all of those 5 assessment areas. In fact, those were nowhere more clearly delineated than in that forensic interviewing course that I took at the Huntsville Center. It is, again, the National Center for Training in Child Advocacy Center Services at Large. And child advocacy centers actually specialize. We have several in Louisiana, even one right here in our region that serves Monroe and all of the surrounding parishes in the northeast corner of our state. So we have a child advocacy center here. It's actually on South Grand in Monroe. And that advocacy center is really all about gathering the forensic information for various forms of child maltreatment. And what they do is interview in a way that allows them to get more detailed information in all of those 5 assessment areas. The child's physical condition, a lot of that comes from the investigation by the DCFS worker, and then the case manager who gathers all of the information from, in turn, the physician who verifies the physical injuries or death is as a result of deliberate harm caused to a child by an adult caregiver. So the child's physical condition, the child's behavior, that's something that a child advocacy center forensic interviewer might identify, as would the child case manager working for the child protection agency, government agency that we call public child welfare at large. We've been introduced to that term already. So whereas, pause for a moment, whereas every state has by federal mandate a specific agency for the protection of children, we call all of those agencies collectively in every state PCWs, public child welfare agencies. Within those agencies are different areas. Child enters care with enters service by investigation. Investigations come from the reports, the call-ins. The other area is when a child is found not to be at risk of harm, imminent harm, and the parents voluntarily cooperate and therefore receive a case manager assigned to them, no longer an interventionist, an investigation, but a case manager and involvement with counseling and parenting, usually parenting instruction for a period of 6 weeks or so. And then they close the case. For cases where a child has been found to be abused by a parent, then the child is placed in foster care. The parents are worked with, and in that case, we have a foster care worker, case manager, and then a case manager for the family in order to assure that they are facilitated in doing what they need to do to improve their home and their ability to care for their children effectively so that the children can be returned home. That's always the first objective of PCW agencies, no matter the state. And then the last area is adoption. So if a child cannot be returned, a parent does not create a safe home, say they're substance abusers and they remain substance abusers, they never recover, then the child may be terminated. Or if a child was killed by a parent's deliberate abuse or neglect, then the child would be removed from the parents, because the parent's going to be in jail probably. And so as a result, the child will be terminated from parental rights, and the state will look for adoptive parents. In that case, they have not only a foster care manager, but then they have an adoptive placement manager seeking to find an adoptive home. And by the way, those occur at the same time. We call that concurrent placement, where a child is in foster care, but they're also being served by an adoption worker who's looking for a home for that child. So there's a lot of service involved in a PCW. Okay. So when I flip back and forth, as I've done all semester, between DCFS or OCS that we used to call it, that I sometimes will say accidentally, or just DCS, Department of Child Services, Department of Child Family Services, the most common names, but the uniform reference to the government agency charged with caring for abused children or protecting children from abuse and neglect, even in their own homes or by adult caregivers, whether in daycare or a group home, that those agencies are referred to uniformly as, or universally as, PCW, Public Child Welfare Agencies. Okay, so forensic interviewing that's conducted not only by child advocacy centers, usually on a consultant basis, they gather all of that information and they work in a consulting way with the case managers in the child welfare agency, in the public child welfare agency. And that could be a case manager in foster care or a case manager in adoption. And it's always about trying to keep a good, stable, permanent home that provides for safety, well-being, as well as permanence for a child. Okay. So forensic interviewing, real interesting information that you may find there. And then finally, well, that isn't the last one, is it? Oh, this one is really interesting. Human trafficking is a growing problem. The Children's Coalition has offered training available for this. We have not had one recently, but these videos, if you've not ever seen or heard of them before, by Kobe Person, he does a lot of videos on a lot of different topics, but he did several on children's vulnerability through social media to be entrapped in child trafficking. So you might want to look at that and be aware of that. It is a growing problem. The trends in recruitment and support of foster parents. This is another public child welfare. See this PCW agency or DCFS in Louisiana. Quality Parenting Initiative. We're one of 16 states who actually are doing this now, and it's growing, but we were among the first states. We weren't the first, but we were the first of the first 9 states to do that, but we have 16 states doing it now as of today. And what this is foster parent training that's online, and there is some excellent stuff there, okay? One of which is from this, the QPI, not from Louisiana's QPI, Quality Parenting Initiative, but a video on lice. So be prepared. I don't know about y'all, but anytime somebody talks about lice, my head starts itching. And so that's a thing when children go into foster care. Foster parents are heroes without a doubt. The majority of them are. Does abuse occur in foster care? Sadly, yeah. Do parents take on more kids than they should? And does the state let them in many states? Yeah, I've seen it. I've worked with cases like that. Do they do it for the money? Yeah, sometimes they do. But that doesn't always make them bad foster parents. There's some excellent foster parents out there that do it because it is another form of income. We can talk about that another time. Okay, so this one is a good video that tells you the kinds of things that foster parents get exposed to and the kinds of training that they have to have because of the conditions that kids come into care with. So there's all of that. Any questions about anything so far? Let me point this out. Go ahead.
Just said no, ma'am, no question.
Okay, all right. Let me point this out here. You see this right here? I see, in going back and seeing what we've covered and what else, what we need to, I need to make sure I don't leave out. I realized that I did not put up, obviously we didn't have this midterm. So we'll just be taking that out of your point totals completely. But we did have this quiz. So you need to have the quiz with the answers, and you have not gotten that yet. So I apologize for that. And I will try to get the grades caught up for you so you can at least know where you stand in this last unit of content. I know that I've had one email from one of y'all that is concerned about that. So I do appreciate that. I understand that. You know, you have humans as instructors. So we have stuff too every now and then. So anyway, look over the content, be prepared for Thursday. We're going to be talking about sexual abuse. And if you will, remind me to tell you about the case of emotional verbal abuse that resulted in a suicide. Very dramatic case that I worked in hospital once. So anywho, I think that's it for today. Sound good?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
All right. Okay. Lexi, let me get back to you. I forgot I have another student to advise. So I'll catch up with you. You're on my radar big time for this week. Okay.
Okay.
And it's regarding advising, of course.
Okay.
All right. Okay, doke. Be sure you sign off to make sure your attendance gets recorded. Okay. Oh,